Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doctors Making a Difference. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Crane. I'm a physician in rural Idaho where I've been in practice since 2011. Over the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to be both a physician and a patient, and I've been so thankful for the doctors and other healthcare professionals who have helped me. I invite you to join us as we highlight physicians around the world who are making a difference in their communities and with their patients. Our goal is to give physicians and other healthcare professionals the tools they need to be successful in medicine, in finances, and in life. What we do makes a tremendous difference for our patients and our communities. Please go to your podcast service or YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review and hit the like or subscribe button. It helps get the message out to others. You can also check out more content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Finally, if you would like to be on the show or have any questions or topics that you feel should be addressed on the show, please contact me. The easiest way to get in contact is to subscribe to the newsletter and then hit reply to any of the newsletter emails. Welcome to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. Today we have my friend Rich Paris. Rich has been one of my healthcare heroes, was one of my mentors in medical school, and it's just been an amazing example in my life. So I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to him and have him introduce himself. And so, yeah, go ahead, Rich. Tell the folks who you are.
I'm Rich Paris. I'm a family doctor for the past 44 years in Haley, Idaho.
That's pretty cool. That's kind of an understatement of all the things that you've done, but you've been up in Haley, Idaho, and the first time I knew about Dr. Paris was when I was in medical school at the University of Utah, and I don't remember if it was the Reader's Digest article or something on a news show, but it talked about this really interesting doctor who flew an airplane to fly out to these remote clinics to help people. And I thought maybe that would just be something in Alaska, but right here in my home state, there's some rural communities that didn't have any doctor, and Dr. Paris was flying out. So at that time, it just seemed so amazing to be able to do that. So I contacted your office, and you let me come, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about that chapter of your life with the airplane and everything like that.
Yeah, that has been one of the interesting things. Even had a period of notoriety as a result of that. But it's been really fun. I've always enjoyed aviation and got my pilot's license right after residency. Actually, I finished my residency in July and immediately went out to the airport. I was at the University of Arizona Medical Center. I went out to the Tucson airport and signed up for flight instruction and got my pilot's license. Flew every day, ground school and flying every single day for 30 days after residency. And then got my private pilot's license. And I was a bit unsettled. I thought at the time I'd be going to a small town somewhere in the mountains. And but at that time I was pretty unsettled. I was single. I wasn't so sure about moving into a small town for a long time career as a single guy, and how would I ever find a wife and that kind of thing. And so I thought maybe I'd end up working in an ER and flying from a place to live to a place to work. So I got my pilot's license, and it was interesting at that time. I was the only member of my residency class that didn't have a job. They all thought it was pretty strange that I was going to take a break and not go right to a job. I didn't even look for a job. And instead, I was looking for a place to go skiing. And I always had this dream of being a ski bum at one point, and I never got to do it. So I thought, well, since I'm pretty unsettled, I'll take a little break here, and I will become a ski bum for a year. So after a big kayak trip on the Grand Canyon and some kayak trips through Idaho, I settled in Sun Valley for the winter to ski. My main goal then was to get a condo where I could ski right to the lift. So I got a season pass and got a condo to ski to the lift, and did that for that whole ski season. And when I thought I was going to run out of money, I took an ER job in Missoula, and so that was a wild year where I thought I would fly back and forth to Missoula, but being a newly minted pilot with no mountain pilot experience, and not even owning an airplane, trying to fly rental airplanes, that didn't really work out so great. So I ended up driving back and forth to Missoula on a regular schedule. But I could do 7 24-hour shifts a month, which was considered full-time work, and I could get a good 2 week block off every month for skiing, or then in the spring and summer kayaking, hiking, and all the mountain activities I like to do. And then after that year, I decided no, I didn't really want to stay in the ER. So I joined a solo family doc in Haley. And then going forward, I got an offer to become the medical director for a rural clinic in Challis, Idaho. And that's where that flying part really came to bear. It was Challis is a extremely rural population, 900 in a county that's huge, the second biggest county in Idaho, virtually the size of Rhode Island, and no doctors. And they had a struggling clinic that had one PA, that one physician assistant that ran the whole clinic. And when they called up and said they needed help for a supervising physician, I thought, well, that will be great. I'll sign up for that, and I'll be able to fly over there from Haley. And so it worked out pretty well because it was a 30-minute flight versus a 2.5 to 3 hour drive. So I started flying, and I would go twice a month and see patients that needed consultation, see patients that the physician assistant had concerns about, do flight exams. I was a airman medical examiner for the FAA, and I still continue that to this day. And so I could do those exams over there. And then I expanded that to take on the clinic in Challis, Idaho, with a grass airstrip.
That
And
was the first one was first one was Chalice, and the second was Stanley. Is that right?
Stanley, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're familiar with both of those towns,
Oh
right?
yeah. No, I mean I've it's awesome. I remember I got to fly with you to both of those communities when I spent my time rotating with you, and as a medical student I was just over the moon. I thought it
Yeah,
was so neat.
it seems it's pretty awesome. And So that kind of grew some attention. They kind of referred to me as the flying doctor, and it got some national attention. And in fact, kind of almost largely because of that, because my I was doing what a lot of all the family doctors in rural Idaho were doing, and that was kind of made it stand out as a bit different. And so I guess it was 2004, I was selected as Idaho's Family Physician of the Year, largely because of, I think, the uniqueness of the flying to the rural clinics. Then the next year, it it pushed on further, and I was selected by the American Academy of Family Physician as America's Family Doctor of the Year, and then that really brought in some publicity, and that's where you would have seen the stuff that came from that. I The year after that, I gave a talk. Part of that award was to give a talk to the Medical Student Congress at the American Academy of Family Physicians the following year. And I have a slideshow that I put together with flying through the mountains and landing in Challis, landing in Stanley. And one of them shows the windsock in the airport in Challis, just all beat up from high winds, and the log cabin um, airport building at Challis, which looks rather frontier
Well, I
and pretty
remember flying. I remember flying there with you and thinking that's the airport, and you're like, "Yep, that's the airport."
Yeah,
Just
that
this
whole
little
thing
teeny.
is the airport. No airport security,
No.
pretty low key, and uh, and so it was pretty dramatic after that presentation. I had phone calls from all over the country from med students who thought, "Can I come out and do a rotation?"
Yeah.
And I tried to keep it more local. We were already taking students on a regular basis from the University of Washington and occasionally from your school, University of Utah. And so that was a great bit of notoriety. And then it resulted in an article in Reader's Digest, where Reader's Digest flew out a writer, Michael Weiss, from Washington, D.C., And that was really fun because he wanted to just see what I do and see how it works. And he was ready to get in the airplane, although he'd never been in an airplane smaller than the SkyWest turboprop that flew him from Salt Lake into Haley. So when he saw my Cessna, he was a little bit nervous. And uh, and so I remember taking off from Haley and flying to Chalice with him. And he goes, "Oh my goodness, I thought we'd be going over all the mountains. We're flying right next to them because, of course, Castle Peak is 11,000 feet and we're flying at 9,500, kind of right around the peak and looking at the White Cloud Mountains and showing lakes and things up there. And then going down to Chalice. So it was quite an adventure for him. And he wrote an article and it was just so funny. I don't think many of my compatriots at the time were reading Reader's Digest, but all their parents were. So, and my parents and all my parents' friends were clearly dialed into Reader's Digest. So when that article came out with this, I think it was called "The Adventures of a Country Doctor." I got fan mail and inquiries from patients across the country and relatives I'd never heard of, and one of the funniest ones was I had two partners at the time, and one of them, his mother calls him and says, "I just read this article in Reader's Digest. Do you know this Dr. Paris?" And of course, it was my longtime partner, and he just had to laugh at his mother's reaction to that.
Well, it's funny because, like, I've been a rural family doctor for a while, and you're not used to any kind of notoriety. Usually, it's kind of I mean, you might be small town famous with the patients that you helped, or someone whose baby you delivered or something, but you don't really have you don't have much of a spotlight on you. That was probably a unique time.
That really was, and then it even went further. It because of that article, NBC got onto it, and a longtime NBC correspondent, Bob Dotson, who had A Day in America that was always on the Today Show, his crew came out and they had read the article, and so they decided they wanted to do a video piece. And then that was really fun because their cameraman from Denver came out and he wanted to have pictures of me flying with the mountain backdrop. So my pilot buddy that does a lot of backcountry flying took the door off his airplane, put the cameraman in his airplane, and we flew side by side through the white clouds, and got some really amazing footage from his airplane, air to air, with my airplane. And then the cameraman got in my airplane and flew with me back and forth to Chalice and did the same drill that I had done with the writer from Reader's Digest, and it just became good friends and a big experience for him as well as really unique opportunity for me. And then they created a video piece with Bob Dotson narrating and interviewing me, and that was on the Today Show. And that was kind of a unique experience with all my family and everybody watching the Today Show and see what I was doing in the whole Chalice travels.
That's pretty cool. So I think I want to go back to some of that stuff. Everybody listening to this is going to be like, "That's the coolest story. How do I get to do something like that?" One of the parts I wanted to kind of reflect back on was how did a young Rich Paris decide to, if you were interested in becoming a ski bum, how did you become a doctor? It sounded like that was an interesting journey. And then how did you decide on rural medicine? It's just kind of this interesting life career. I was curious how you did that.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in Mandan, North Dakota, on the Missouri River, and its claim to fame was Fort Abraham Lincoln, where Custer was stationed before he went off to his big battle at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and also where Lewis and Clark stayed in the winter of 1804, 1805. And so a small rural town. My dad owned a hardware store and sporting goods store. So I grew up hunting, fishing, all the outdoor activities, and summer trips hiking and backpacking in Montana, and then learning to ski in a tiny little ski area in on the hills overlooking the Missouri River. And then a few ski trips to Colorado in high school just convinced me I really wanted to live in the mountains. And So I knew someday I'd end up in the mountains, and I wasn't sure quite how I do that. I got a little bit distracted there. I was recruited to play football for the Air Force Academy, and I thought, I thought I'd be really interested in doing kind of aerospace medicine and that kind of thing because I'd always thought about doing medical school and doing medicine. And so I went off to the Air Force Academy, and the difficulty I had was that the Air Force really wanted me to do a career in the Air Force, and I wanted to pay my 5 years of Air Force commitment for the Academy and get a scholarship. And I realized I could pay for med school myself. I didn't need the Air Force to pay for it, and so I really struggled with that decision. But I really realized I was more of a free spirit, and I really wanted to be able to have total control of my life and do what I felt like I wanted to do. And the regimentation of a military career um, didn't seem to fit that. And I fell back on the fact that my dad's best friend was our family doctor, who I hunted and fished with all growing up, and he was my mentor. He was my role model to say, I really want to. When I thought about it, I really want to have a career like he had, and with the impact that he had on our family, my siblings and my parents, and the whole family dynamic and the whole small town aspect of him delivering all of us and then taking care of us all the way through high school. I thought, that's what I really want to do. So I made a difficult decision of transferring from the Air Force Academy after 2 years. And luckily then I could finish 2 complete years of the academy and not have to have a commitment to the Air Force, and transferred to Washington University in St. Louis, finished my undergraduate degree, and then went to the University of Rochester in New York for medical school. And knew I didn't want to stay back east, so didn't look at any residencies other than west. And then, as I say, ended up at the University of Arizona Medical Center for residency. And then it was a given that I'd be somewhere in the Northern Rockies after that, and then ultimately settled in Haley.
So you can reflect back. I think a lot of people can reflect back to when they were kids or when they were in their young adult years, somebody that stood out in their minds that, oh, that person had a big influence. And in your case, it sounds like that family doctor that was friends with your dad made kind of a big impact on you as a young man, so much that you kind of changed your career path partway through.
Exactly. Yeah, that I think there is always something like that that draws you to a certain pathway, and that was really significant.
Well, so the other one I want to ask is, uh, you were born in the middle of the country and you spent a lot of time in the mountains, but I also know that you like to sail. So I want to hear how did that? You're a free spirit and an adventurer and a person who just takes on whatever opportunities present in front of you. But how did you learn to become an accomplished sailor? I'd just like to hear that story because that from a
That's
landlocked
yeah,
midwestern
that is rather
state.
surprising for a total mountain guy. But we had a place on a lake in North Dakota, and we had a small sailboat, and I really enjoyed sailing the small sailboat. And I was like, gosh, what would it be like to sail a yacht? It would just be so cool. And well, before I got married, as a sidebar, I had a little travel business where we did adventure travel, continuing medical education for doctors. And so that got me going. We did ski trips here in Sun Valley. We did bike trips in the San Juan Islands and in Vermont and in the wine country, California. We did scuba diving trips in Cozumel. And one of the trips we did was a sailing trip in Hawaii where we chartered a boat. And and I remember being on that trip, and I told the captain, I want to be your first mate, and because I wanted to learn as much as I can, um, and about sailing, so that I can do this as a vacation activity in the future. And so I used that resume, that 1 week on a sailboat, to then be able to do a charter in the easiest place to rent a sailboat in the British Virgin Islands, and took my now wife, who was a girlfriend at the time, on our first trip together to the British Virgin Islands, and chartered a 32-foot sailboat and sailed around the Virgin Islands, which was pretty easy because you can see all the islands and the navigation is pretty straightforward. And then I went to this San Juan Islands out of Seattle, actually out of Bremerton, Washington, and did a certified sailing course so I could get certified for coastal cruising and charter boat sailing. And since then, it's been a really favorite activity. My wife and I, we've chartered boats in Greece. We did Greece for our honeymoon actually, and we've been back to Greece since then on another charter. Last summer we chartered in Tahiti, um, and back to the British Virgin Islands several times, Belize, the coast of Maine. A lot of places you would never think you would be able to travel to very easily, but really exciting to do it in your own sailboat.
Oh, I remember I went to a medical meeting somewhere in the last couple of years, and I sent you a message, and after, I didn't hear back from you. And then afterwards, like, oh, sorry, I missed you. I was sailing in Tahiti or something. I'm like, oh my goodness, this guy's
Yeah,
still Rich Paris, still larger than life.
was Tahiti was a really great trip. Of course, they were having the surfing for the Olympics while we were there. Right before we started our charter boat rental, we went down to check out the site for the Olympics. But Tahiti and Bora Bora, sailing around those islands is just completely magical.
That is so cool. Well, so as again, most people like me and just like you have this busy life with a practice and patients that count on you and a limited time, limited funding, all that kind of stuff. How did you find time? You worked the flying into your career, like you'd fly to Stanley and Chalice on a routine basis. How did you work in the sailing? Did you have practice partners that would cover while you're gone, or how have you done that?
Yeah, I did. I've been very fortunate in that way to kind of always be part of a small group that was very accommodating. Everybody enjoyed the outdoors. Everybody wanted time off. I remember in med school in Rochester, New York. First of all, there's not very much family practice. It was mostly internal medicine, and everybody looking to what city they're going to practice in. And when I told them I was thinking of going out west and being a rural family doctor, all the faculty couldn't quite figure that out. They just said, "Well, you'll never have any time off. You'll never be able to enjoy life. Are you sure that's gonna work for you?" And so I knew I needed to be in a group, and I knew I needed to have partners that would be interested in the same thing, so we could do shared time off. Started off with a group of three of us, and ultimately grew the group to eight, and always had the goal that everybody would want to take time off. Everybody should take time off to enjoy the wonderful mountains of Idaho and travels beyond.
It's an important thing, and you've watched this over your career arc. It seems like a lot of people talk about medicine in the past, and then people get really stressed because they they don't feel like they can take time off, or if they do, there's a lot of constraints on it. And so one of the keys to success seems to be to have partners you can rely on, even in a small town. Like that's pretty hard. Like your residency mentors talked about, it's hard to take time off, but having that group, that key group of people you can really rely on, seems to have made a big difference.
Really, that I think is key, so you can pace yourself. I always felt like I was so fortunate to be busy enough to never get bored, but never so busy that I felt I was going to get burned out and not be able to continue the whole process.
Yeah, when you're just think back over the past 20 years or so, have you still worked in the ER as a little bit too? You did that early on, or did you leave that part behind after you went to the small town?
No, so basically, I went from full-time ER doctor, and that was what that there was a time when, again, when I was single, I thought, maybe I just stay in the ER. And certainly the time off looked quite inviting, but it was so dramatic to me how I missed the continuity. And in residency, the continuity wasn't so great that you could really see the bind of that, the draw of that. But when I was in the ER and I just longed to wonder what happened to this patient or that patient. Um, and of course, like you, I had done advanced training in obstetrics, and I really loved the obstetrics. And so in the ER, I really missed that. So while it was hard to leave that ER job in one sense, um, it it was really essential that I get back to the original dream of a small town family doc. And so the first years we had the small Haley Hospital, and I did ER from home with my two other partners, and then when my wife joined us, the four of us took ER call from home. And then as things came on, in 2000, the hospitals merged. This tiny Sun Valley hospital. People couldn't believe that Haley had a 9-bed hospital and Sun Valley had a 12-bed hospital, 10 miles apart. But that was the layout at that time. And when that wasn't really feasible, medical staff went to looking to help figure out how we could get one single hospital for the community. And St. Luke's in Boise was approached and came up with the idea of building a hospital just south of Ketchum. So then we had a full-time ER group, and then we all worked a little bit in the ER as full-time shifts in that ER, and did that for half a dozen years, and then decided to just focus on the OB and the clinical practice in the office.
So at that point, uh, at that point in the career, you transitioned off of covering the ER, and then it was full time practice, rounding on your patients in the hospital, and then obstetrics, because you're always on call for obstetrics. Yeah,
Correct. Yeah.
yeah. The time I spent with you, I think you and I were talking before we started recording. I think it was about 2007. And in the weeks that I spent with you, I remember we would go to the hospital and round on inpatients. We'd do deliveries, including C-sections, and spend time in the clinic. And then every Wednesday or whatever day it was, you'd fly out to these outlying communities, Chalice and Stanley, and it was quite an interesting schedule because you had the full spectrum, and you could only really travel out of town like that because you had good partners. I remember you saying at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Wednesday is for 25 years. Wednesday's been my flying day, and patients would even know that. They'd say, "Oh, um, I was gonna try to call you, but I knew you weren't in because you'd be flying on Wednesday."
Yeah, they knew the schedule.
Yeah,
Well, and
and I even had to affect everything. I ended up having to change. Nobody likes to take call on Monday night, but I had to make my OB uh, hospitalist call Monday night because I started out as Tuesday night, and then if I had an all-nighter and I had to fly on Wednesday, that didn't work out so well. So I ended up changing it so I would take my OB call and my hospital call on Monday night, and so I could always get a good night's sleep on Tuesday night before I'd fly on Wednesday.
yeah. So do you still have it that way where you have kind of an OB call schedule where instead of delivering just your own patients, you take the night call and whoever's on night does the deliveries, or how have you structured that?
Yeah, I'm thinking when you were there, when you came with us, I was seeing my own patients at the
I
hospital
think so.
probably.
Yeah, I think so
Yeah,
back then.
that was the rotation we did then. And it was interesting. There's been so much evolution, and it's just hard for me to remember when we evolved at what stage. But our next stage then was to, amongst our group, which had grown to 6 doctors by that point, we decided it wasn't at all efficient for all of us to drive 6, 7 miles up to the hospital to round on 1 or 2 patients each. So we made our own little hospitalist rotation where we took turns, and one every 6 weeks you would have a hospital week with very limited office, but you'd be at the hospital every morning rounding on all of our patients. And that was a bit of a change. People were like, "Oh, you're not going to see me in the hospital," but they knew all my partners, and so we did a pretty good job of educating them that this was a good way to do it. It certainly worked for us, and it was sort of an evolution to we called it a modified hospitalist
Yeah.
scenario, and we did that to this day where somebody's in on the hospital rotation and out of the clinic, and then the other physicians are covering up their patients in the clinic.
So did you do something similar with obstetrics?
In obstetrics, we had we had not everybody in the early days. Everybody did obstetrics, and then as some people weren't doing as much and wanted to drop out of that, we ended up with when we were a group of 8, we had 6 of us doing obstetrics, but uh, we didn't have everybody trained in C-section. So we we continued the scenario where we made sure we had a pretty good rotation. But I've had times where I've had every other night call for C-section and every fourth night call for OB. And so the hospitalist would do the deliveries, but I would have a separate C-section call.
Yeah, and that's what you worked out just as your group among the
Exactly.
6 of you. That's a good
Yeah.
way to do it. I practice in a rural community, and we're always trying to figure out how to balance that because for the last 13 years, the majority of the time, if somebody is in labor and I'm in town, I'm just on call. But it would be hard. It's hard to leave town because you have to make special arrangements, and so I think everybody, it's not unique. A lot of people practice in rural communities because most of our country, most of the United States is rural. And so it's trying to figure out that balance. And if you're in a bigger hospital system that has hospitalists and ER doctors and OBGYNs, and you have kind of a different group, but in the small town family doctor setting, you're it. You're the OB, you're the ER, you're the inpatient, you're outpatient, you're nursing home. And so it's interesting you as a group work that out.
Yeah, and that you hit it on the head. That's the most amazing thing of small town family medicine is like from the nursery to the nursing home
Yeah.
and everything in between with multiple generations of the family. There's really no other sort of area of medicine where you get that breadth of experience and activity.
Yeah, and it's one of my things that I would hope as people go through their training. Not everybody gets it, but I would want to see everybody have the experience of working in a small town like that because I'm not sure that everybody gets that, because a lot of our country is rural, but unless you've spent time in these little teeny towns, you don't realize that. I mean, you have to be a jack of all trades because the next person you can ship somebody to another town, but in my case, the nearest medical center is about an hour and a half drive, and I think from where you're at, that's probably about the same. I don't know how far is it to your next kind of big center.
Yeah, well, our big transfer center by helicopter is Boise, 120
Yeah,
miles away. Yeah, 2.5 hours. And now Twin Falls has grown quite a bit. And so Twin Falls has become a bit of a referral center as well. But for the most of my career, it's been intensive care nursery in Boise, um, surgical specialists in Boise that we've utilized.
yeah, and you're in Idaho's a really mountainous state, and it's where I'm at. So a lot of times in the winters, same thing as what happens in your case. The canyons are closed, the roads are impassable, and nobody can fly because it's just a storm system. And they'll come in, and I mean, you can't realistically send somebody out of town, or if you are, it's on an ambulance with you in the ambulance, or somebody that knows how to manage a ventilator, trying to make your way over a canyon, a couple of canyons to get to a bigger center, and it's kind of crazy, but it's what happens.
And even more significant in Chalice, where they've got a helipad right next to the clinic. And but all the times in the winters, so many times where I get a call and they need some advice on how to manage a patient that they've already called Lifeline, and they're going to fly the patient out, and the patient or the weather is so bad they can't fly, and then it's a 4-hour drive to Idaho Falls.
Right, and you have to
And
manage the person.
exactly, yeah,
Well, and it's another interesting I think I reflect on is we live in just like I live in a place, the Bear Lake Valley is quite a vacation spot, and so is Haley Ketchum Sun Valley, big vacation spots, and I think sometimes people don't realize that when you go to those areas, if you call 911, a helicopter might come get you, but they may not be able to. A lot of
yeah.
times the services are willing, but the air conditions won't allow it, so it is kind of a lengthy transfer to transfer out of the area, and so we want to make sure we provide top-notch services in our small hospitals, and it sounds like you've been at the helm of that for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Well, so how as we were talking before we hit record this morning, I was curious, how has that evolved? You said you've been doing it for over 40 years, which is impressive, and that level of business or that level of service for that many years. How has that evolved over time? What you cover and how you've been able to manage that and still keep flying and I know you're still sailing. So
Definitely still sailing. Hopefully, sailing and flying go till the bitter end.
yeah,
And but Yeah, one of the things that intrigued me about my practice and my career was doing my own thing, and so it was doing private practice and starting with two partners and managing and controlling everything was pretty important. And we did that for all the way from 1980 to what was 2006, 2007. And 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 I'd always thought that the role or the model would be that that we would get junior partners in to buy in, and then eventually they would buy in and take over the practice. That worked for the first three or four partners that came in, and then something changed in the dynamic of the young doctors. It seemed, and all the doctors that were coming out of residency, and literally two-thirds of my partners were people who came through rotation like you did on med school or the Boise residency, where they came to work with us, and then we hired them later. Um, but eventually, the young doctors were pretty clear that they didn't want to go into debt to buy into a practice. They didn't even want to manage a practice. They'd rather just work for the hospital. And so that was a wake up call for us. And we decided there isn't going to be anybody to sell this practice to when we want to slow down. We better think of a different model. And at that time, St. Luke's was looking to bring physicians on to employed status. And at the same time, we were looking for a new building. We had outgrown our Haley Clinic building, and we needed to do something new. And it was seemed quite daunting to at that stage build a clinic. And so St. Luke's offered to bring us on board and let us design a clinic that would work for us. And that was rather amazing because we were able to sit down with the architect and literally design the 8-person office that we thought would be ideal. And we did exactly that and sold our practice to St. Luke's, and then became employed doctors of St. Luke's and continue that to this day.
Oh, it's been a good transition plan for you and your partners. I like that. How have
It
you?
sure has, and it makes me wonder sometimes. I wonder would I be one of the ones? Would I have given up my entrepreneur kind of desires of early stage to work for the hospital coming out now, or would I still want to? Uh, would I be comfortable working for the hospital? So, but it's so much more common to be employed now, and it really is a good model overall, and offers a lot of flexibility that we didn't even have as a private practice. So that transition just worked out perfectly for us.
Do you think, just kind of a sidebar, do you think that the insurance environment or the billing practices or things like that have changed significantly over that time? Because there's been a big shift where people will primarily go to an employed thing instead of starting into a private practice, and for better or worse, that sometimes means doctors lose some of the influence or power they had as employers and as entrepreneurs. But at the same time, it seems like the business side of medicine is pretty challenging. And I was curious if that's actually changed or if that's just perception.
No, I think it's definitely changed, and I think that unless you're going to do direct primary care, it really is probably the only feasible way for most people to do primary care practice is in the hospital system, and and you still have a I think if you choose the right system and the structure is good, it can be very rewarding and still have enough autonomy, not like we had when we were running our own business, but then of course the responsibilities and some of the risk is much less as well. So I think it is a real phenomenon that's going to stick.
Yeah, well, so you can reflect back when you and your partners started in Haley all those years ago. I'm assuming you had someone that kind of just did the billing and the practice management could be done sort of in house, and now it's become more complicated. And your lived experience would say that's true.
That's exactly right. And then some of the escalating costs of electronic medical records and stuff like that fuel that even more. And when I think of the amount of uh, IT services that goes on at our place, I don't know how you would manage that by on your own independently.
Yeah, I've had that same thought. It's interesting. And in a small town, you do gain some of the protections. The hospital shares that risk with you a little bit because if you get sick or you get down for a while, if it's just you you don't have a lot to fall back on. But if you're with an organization, they say, well, you've got some sick time or you've got some paid time off accumulated or something along those lines. So there's pros and cons, but it sounds like for your particular practice, the benefits outweighed the risks at some point.
Yes, yes, I think that's true. The other flexibility aspect of that I hadn't really thought about, but turned out to be extremely valuable to me is first of all, I never thought about retirement. When I turned 65 and people started asking about retirement, I go, "You mean I got to quit?"
Love it.
I had no desire to quit or hadn't even thought about it. I thought I guess I'd be one of these folks that just pushes on forever till you can't physically do it. But also the sailing trips and the hunting trips and all of that activity was pulling on me to get more time. And I guess it's like just 2 years ago, I did a kind of an official retirement from full time work, and I was able to go to a flex schedule where I can just voluntarily let let my office know when I'd like to work. Um, and that's not feasible in private practice. I mean, I couldn't keep an office staff. Um, I couldn't pay the malpractice to work such part time. So I'm down to like 3 days a month at the main clinic and the Wednesdays flying. And that wouldn't really be feasible in a private practice. So the ability to dial it back but still be involved is has been a real blessing and really only feasible because of our current practice structure.
So you were able to make it so that you still fly on Wednesdays, and you said about 3 days a month. Is that what you said for the
Correct. Yeah.
other clinic? And
Yeah.
are you out of the obstetrics side of it,
I'm
or
totally out of obstetrics and totally out of hospital calls. So the biggest change with that retirement scenario was for the first time in 40 years, no night call, no weekends. And I thought I did pretty good with basically working one weekend a month for 40 years, but all of a sudden I wanted more time off. And getting that extra weekend and more weeks off completely, just really wanted to be able to, while I still felt energetic enough to do a lot of adventure, I didn't want to push it off too late.
I think it's so cool. I'm glad that you've been able to make that transition. One of the questions that I think everybody would have is, you know, in the world of medicine, a lot of times primary care doctors are characterized as underpaid and burned out and stressed. And you've been able to figure out a way to say, well, let's do some of these things that or either bake it in or have adventures. You can do sailing and flying, and you've been able to have that experience. I think people would ask, like, how have you managed to still be in practice? Avoid the burnout, and then the second piece of it, how did you afford to have a plane? A lot of people want that experience, but the practical part of it is quite expensive.
Yeah, interesting questions. Um, the I think one of the key things was to avoid the burnout is not get kind of overly busy and too much time commitment. And as I mentioned, with the partner scenario in the clinical practice set up the way we had it, avoided that, and so that made it feasible. Um, it was interesting. The evolution with the airplane is a whole process, and and sometimes a small airplane isn't as expensive. I mean, sometimes nowadays fancy cars cost as much as an airplane. And my first airplane, I bought into a partnership. I had a patient who was putting a new engine in an older airplane, and he decided he wanted to get a partner to help pay for it. And I thought, wow, that's great. He doesn't. I know it's not a difficult airplane because he's not trying to sell it. He's just trying to get someone to share the expense with him. And so that turned out to be a great learning experience and a great introduction. We actually expanded that to three of us, and then one guy moved away, so two of us had that same airplane you flew in. Well, actually, we had an airplane before that, and then we wanted to upgrade. I had three kids and a dog, so a four-place airplane wasn't enough. So the two of us decided to buy a bigger Cessna that had six seats, and so we could take it back to visit family with my whole family. And he had a condo in Mexico, my partner, and so the plane worked great for both of us. So one of the aspects was sharing the expenses with a partner, and I did that for many years until my partner moved away and had to buy him out. Another really good pilot moved to town, patient of mine, and he became my new partner. And I partnered with him until he moved away, and then bought him out. And all along the way, I was building a little more equity in the airplane and more experience in managing it because that's a whole process with insurance and
Right.
maintenance and all of that, and made it financially feasible. And of course, it was a business expense the whole way, and so that helps a bit. And so through that process, was able to make that work.
It's pretty neat. Uh, I think it's just fascinating, and I'm sure that's why in 2004 to 2008, you got a lot of notoriety at that time from the publications. But the other thing that's interesting is it wasn't just this whole experience. It wasn't something you just did for 5 years. You've been able to keep doing some of that stuff for over 40 years, and it's impressive to keep up that skill set. Did you ever have a time? It seems like you told me once you had to land in one of your patients' fields. Did you ever have an experience where the airplane had to have make an emergency landing? Am I correct on remembering that?
You are actually. Yeah, in an airplane, you have all sorts of experiences. I've landed at one time. I had to land on a road, and the engine was misbehaving, and there's some issues with the fuel line, and I was able to take off and not have an issue there. The episode that you're mentioning was early 2000s, and I was coming back from Twin Falls, and it was purely pilot air. I There was a technique where it was really hot from Twin Falls, and you could use the boost pump to get more fuel, and I put the boost pump on to help the engine cool. And my landing checklist should have included making sure the fuel boost pump is off, and I didn't make note of that because I rarely ever use the boost pump. And so as I was coming into the Haley Airport, the fuel was too rich basically because the boost pump's still on as I dialed back and was getting ready to land, and all of a sudden I lost power
Mm.
of the engine. Um, Fortunately, there's a barley field that extends for a full mile before the Haley Airport, and I've always liked to read about other people's problems with flying, and one of the things is always trying to make the airplane go farther than it can go when you don't have power. So rather than try to make the airport and maybe hit the fence right at the end, I decided to make a landing right into the barley field, and that was kind of rough because it was obviously in the news, and but the airplane wasn't harmed at all, and came to a fairly quick stop because of the traction of all the barley flying around. Um, and I thought we could just hook a tow and open the fence and tow it up, but the maintenance people didn't like that idea, so we had to bring a truck in and lift it up with a crane and put it on the back of a flatbed truck and haul it back to the airport. But all it needed was to go to the maintenance shop and pull out all the barley out of the engine and the other parts, and there was no damage to the airplane, thank goodness, and obviously no damage to me, just a little bit of embarrassment.
Oh, it's yeah. I mean, I guess you had to buy some barley that year.
Yeah, yeah. My patient kind of threatened to do that, but he never actually billed me for it.
Oh, he never did. He's
Oh,
probably just glad that you survived it.
exactly,
Oh my
exactly.
goodness, that's crazy. Well, think back over the, this wonderful career you've had. Do you have any patient stories you could share? I know you've had a million of them going back and forth to the trying to get OB patients delivered all the way from those outlying communities to your to the main hospital, and I just wondered if there's any experiences like that you could share.
Oh, yeah, you say there's so many like we
Right.
all have. I guess one of my thoughts is I really wish I had have kept a diary. I wish I would have made notes on, in retrospect, every delivery because they're all special, they're all unique, uh, and some of them are just memorable. You never forget. Um, One that was just sort of interesting was when I was in Chalice, and it was a really bad weather day, and I had to drive. And so I was over there, had driven. An OB patient came in for a prenatal check, near term, and and the nurse said, "Well, her bag of waters has broken, and she's wondering if she's starting to have contractions." And I go, "We better check her right away." And we did, and sure enough, membranes had been ruptured, and she was starting into labor, and she was actually somewhat dilated already. And I thought, boy, I'd rather not deliver her here, and we've got some time. So I thought to myself, we should try to see if I think we could probably make it to Haley. And so we set up a scenario where I took the precip basin that we would use for an emergency delivery, and I got in my car behind her car with her husband driving, and told them if it got too far along, they would just stop and we would have a delivery on the roadside. And if we made it to Stanley, halfway there we would stop and check. And so, and no cell service then. And so all we could do was me follow them, got to Stanley, and it was kind of concerning. So we went into the Stanley Clinic and did a check there to see. And I said I think we were ready to do delivery right there in that clinic, if need be. But I thought we could make it over the hill, and so we got back in the cars and drove over Galena Pass. And from the Stanley Clinic, I had them call and tell them we're on our way, be ready up in labor and delivery. And we rolled into the emergency door and ran upstairs and had a delivery about 10 minutes later.
Oh my
So
goodness.
cut it kind of close and avoided the delivery out on the highway.
Wow. Did you ever deliver anybody in Stanley or Chalice, or did most of them make it to Sun Valley or to
I
Wood
monitored
River?
several deliveries that the physician assistants did, but never a delivery while I was there.
So some of the
I
physician
did get a
assistant
few
had to,
deliveries. Yeah, physician assistants had to do a couple of deliveries over all those years on my patients.
because the person would present too far along or something. And
Right.
did
Exactly.
they had oxygen and all the and suction and
Exactly.
all that stuff in that
Hmm.
clinic?
Yeah.
And then would they transfer the baby via ambulance? Then after that, once
Exactly. Yeah.
things were stable.
Hmm. Yeah.
Wow. That's a crazy story following somebody on a stormy night, just you with your little precipitous delivery kit, saying, like,
Yeah.
well, I
Yeah.
don't really want to deliver on the top of Galena Pass, so we'll just keep on going.
Then there's one where one of the unique episodes that all my partners still remember to this day is my nurse comes into me in our old Haley clinic where you were at. They This patient in room three, this young lady in room three is having vaginal bleeding, and I think she might be having a miscarriage. And so we ran into that office exam room, and I had to get her in stirrups right away so we can do an exam, and the head was crowning.
Oh, goodness, right then.
And so they had him run back and get the precip tray out of the hospital's attached, but we didn't even have time to get back to the labor and delivery room. And we delivered a 7-pound baby in the office exam room, um, and did all the usual stuff there. And one of the nurses ran down to the local variety store and bought some diapers and a little baby outfit to give to the mom. Obviously, the mom was in a bit of denial that she had been pregnant for
Oh, dear.
eight and a half months.
Oh, she had not done this is a surprise,
No,
but if
no,
they
she
hadn't told
didn't.
anybody.
She was, oh, this is a surprise.
Oh boy.
Yeah, kind of a little denial, right?
I should say, goodness gracious. Well, it's
Yeah,
interesting. In the delivery of obstetrics, I think sometimes we tend to think about it as like this, like this big complicated thing, and have to have all these systems built around it. And it's true. We do need to make sure we try to cut down our mortality rate and all that kind of stuff, and try to really make sure that you walk out of there with a healthy mom and baby. But I kind of try to preach this a little bit. Having a baby, being pregnant is not a disease. It's just a normal part of being an adult woman. And so I think people live in all sorts of inconvenient places. So it's great to be able to deliver people where they're at and help them, and be able to coach the PAs or anybody you might work with, so that process can be safe and effective, and make sure that we have as good outcomes as we can.
yeah. There's not very many clinics where you have drills on deliveries in Chalice. It's like there's one room that's the ER, and
Right.
that would be our delivery room up there. So we'd have to have drills for it. So like you mentioned, so that the physician assistants that work there are comfortable in that scenario where there's got to be a delivery at the rural clinic and not even the hospital.
Well, I think when I was there, you had a couple of people that we knew they were going to deliver soon, just because of their dates. And I think a lot of them, if they lived in Chalice, would come stay near the hospital for those last couple of weeks, if they had some family or somebody nearby, because it is hard when if you're driving. They're crazy at 2 o'clock in the morning in a storm trying to get there. And so,
Exactly. And for the same reason, whenever it was feasible, we would do an elective induction a lot of times at 39 weeks
right.
and and have control of it that way. So we try to prevent that scenario from happening as much as we could.
Well, it makes a big difference for those patients who are in those communities to have someone who has the experience and expertise. You don't have an OR, you can't do a C-section, but you can manage a delivery. You can manage some complications of delivery and be there, even if it's not ideal. Because the reality is, a lot of our country is pretty rural, and Chalice is uniquely rural for the lower 48 states. But it's still your ability to go out there and help them has really helped a lot of people. I'm confident.
Yeah, sure has.
Well, so one of the other things, if we have a minute, is to talk about this. Is we people get themselves burned out and stressed because they're just financially so stressed because they come out of medical school and residency, and you have this big debt load, and people are anxious to spend a lot of money when they finish up a residency because doctors have kind of put off a lot of things for a lot of years. And I wondered, what would you advise somebody? You've been able to do pretty much any of these adventures you ever set your mind to doing, and you've been able to manage it. And I was curious, what financial advice would you give any of like any young physicians or mid-career physicians, so they stay out of trouble and can continue to live some of the things that they envision doing?
I think one thing that was helpful for me was marrying a doctor.
That does
So
help.
we had two incomes rather than one. But I think the most important thing is avoid distractions. And I had a little wayward activity before I was married when I mentioned I'd done that adventure travel company, and and that became a money drain and lost some money there, and actually was putting some money into a retirement fund and then borrowing it from the retirement fund to fund that business. And I'd recommend not doing that
No.
to anybody. But fortunately, that was only a couple of years. And as soon as I got married, then and it got a lot more conservative. And I think the single biggest thing was having a financial manager that helped us with our clinic, that helped us set up a 401k retirement fund for our entire clinic, and then maximizing contributions to that fund for the last 30 years, and the compounding of just regular investments in a fairly conservative setup uh, has proven to be more than adequate, such that retirement income is not really a question at all. So I think it's consistency and conservative money management over the long haul. I suppose, like all money managers preach, is the way to go, and avoid short-term um, big money opportunities that look inviting, but but don't provide the consistency and the safety of the long-term
Oh,
pathway.
slow and steady wins the race. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing how you did the airplane stuff because some people might think, well, that sounds like a big frill, but you were able to do it in a partnership. You were able to kind of learn a lot of your own just maintenance and understanding of the plane. You were able to do it in multiple partnerships, and then you're able to also incorporate it into your business, and so that at least a part of that cost can be defrayed by that. That's been a great way to do that.
It reminds me now of one of the wildest adventures of all time, um, was getting a new airplane.
Hmm.
Um, my the airplane that you flew in that I thought I would keep forever. It was a 1974 Cessna that was on its third engine and all upgraded interior, new seating, leather interior, and everything, and all new instrumentation, but the same airframe from 1974. I thought I would keep that airplane forever, and then in 2000, it it developed it failed an inspection. I go in for a physical exam and failed because they detected corrosion in a key part of the support for the wing structure, and the plane got grounded and was going to need a major repair. Um, and the part that would be needed had already been sold out in the country, so I couldn't find a repair shop that could get their hands on the piece of equipment that was needed for the repair. So I basically had to sell the airplane, and I sold it to a friend who rebuilds airplanes, and he could take it and wait around to get the right parts and put the airplane back together. That airplane's still flying, but it wasn't going to work for me to be out of an airplane for so long. So I decided it was time to buy a new airplane, and so I went through this computer search process for 6 months, 4 to 6 months, while I used a rental airplane for the work, which was never very much fun. I was like flying my own airplane, felt more comfortable in my own airplane, and searched and searched and searched and couldn't find what I was looking for. And then I finally found it on the internet, um, and thought this is the perfect airplane. And and as I looked into it deeper, it was perfect on studying all the ramifications, and all the equipment on the airplane was perfect. The only difficulty was it was in Asuncion, Paraguay.
Oh, a long way.
Yeah. So that started a whole process of how do I get this airplane and get it back here to Idaho. And so the whole month of August 2021, in the middle of COVID, I spent getting this airplane. So I flew from Haley. My wife thought, my attorney, my aviation attorney, definitely thought I was crazy. But I bought a one-way ticket to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and then from there to Asuncion, Paraguay, to check out the airplane. It was owned by a wealthy rancher who was buying a new airplane in the States, brand new Cessna from the factory in Wichita, and so he's going to sell. He was selling this Cessna, and so that turned out to be an amazing adventure. I flew with him to his two ranches, which were grass airstrips. He had me fly the airplane to get used to it. We flew all around Paraguay for 3 or 4 days. There were all sorts of purchasing questions and escrow money between two different countries, and took a while to get that all squared away. I told my wife I'm not going to do anything crazy, and I might be coming home without an airplane, but we'll see what happens. And it turned out that I was able to get the ferry pilot that was going to fly the new airplane from Wichita back down to Paraguay. Um, I got him to fly with me, and we flew it back from Paraguay all the way the whole length of Brazil over the Amazon, which is really wild
Yeah,
because you
you
have no
can't
place to
land.
contact. You can't no place to land and no radio contact, and airplanes have been lost and never found in the jungle of the Amazon. Um, then flew over Guyana out into the Caribbean, and flew all the Caribbean islands up to Florida, and then Florida to Wichita.
Hmm.
And then he got out and got into the other airplane to fly back, and I flew it to Haley. And so that's the airplane I have now.
So
So
it's
it's
got a
it's
pretty long range if you can make that trip from Paraguay all the way to Idaho in what, 3 stops?
oh no, many stops.
Oh,
It was I think 12 fuel stops, 5 days to get from Paraguay back to Haley.
wow. That is an adventure.
Yeah, it was pretty, and it took me I think it was 6 COVID tests because every 3 days it was right in the middle of COVID, so it was pretty wild for that reason. I think I definitely had 6 different COVID tests because every time you crossed the border you had to have a new COVID test. And so just lining up COVID tests at almost every landing was experiencing itself.
Well, I'm
I
glad
never
you
got
have an
COVID.
airplane. I'm glad you got
Never
one
got
that
COVID.
works.
Never got sick, you know. So
Oh,
that was
good. That's a blessing. Well, you've got your plane now. You can keep flying, and sounds like for the foreseeable future, you still get to do it. You still get to do what you love, and I love it.
yeah. I definitely will keep it going as long as I can.
That's pretty neat. Well, thank you for going over this. Do you have any other advice for our listeners? I think people will be fascinated by this story of a life lived and having all these adventures sort of baked into your life.
Yeah, I think the main thing is uh, figure out what's really important to you and focus on the important stuff. Don't worry about the politics and don't worry about the things that frustrate you. It's so easy to get kind of caught up in things you can't control, and I've always been one to advocate to really focus on the things that you have control over and downplay and ignore the things that you can't control. And in medicine, there's so many things that you get to control, and there's so many amazing aspects to this career that I think if you just really focus on the good stuff when frustrations appear, to not let that get you down is key. And the other thing I think is so important is to embrace change. I mean, as we've talked about the amount of change that you've seen in your career, and definitely the amount of change that I've seen. And if you embrace the change and look forward to new challenges, it's like learning a new flying skill. I mean, when you have to learn the EMR when you couldn't hardly type, um, is uh, is quite an effort. But if you decide this is a new challenge and there's some excitement in this, and I can learn new things by doing this, um, going to different payment models in the healthcare system and going to an EMR and going to scribes or AI scribes, which we're now messing with now. It's a huge amount of change. My day to day office experience totally different than it was in the early 80s. But I think by looking forward to that change and embracing it is a huge part of happiness in that arena.
It's such good advice. I again for years you've been one of my heroes. Like and that's because in my formative years of medical school, I got to go spend some time with you, and it wasn't like this. It wasn't someone that was you weren't trying to like show off or be fancy. Just a normal person trying to take care of patients, and we love the airplane and the adventures and all the different things, but just to get in there and take care of people, meet them where they're at, and go to their community and take care of people, and I think that's why it's been a fulfilling career. I'm sure for a lot of years, patients know that when they show up, you're just going to treat them like neighbors because that's what they are. They're friends and neighbors and family, and I remember being impressed with your ability to do that in your community, and I think that's one of the things that brings a lot of satisfaction in my life, and I've talked to other doctors, same story, that you just enjoy just the real interaction with other people, and you get to know them as real people, and you really care about them. And then once they know that you have that level of trust, they'll trust you with some of their most difficult challenges that they are facing.
Yeah, I think that aspect and just the longevity of delivering a child, watching them grow up in your community, um, going to hockey games with them and playing with your kids, and um, I remember high school graduation where our boys were graduating from high school, and we had delivered a large portion of that graduating class. And you would see them at 18 when you were the first person to lay eyes on them. when they were born. I mean, just a very unique and interesting experience there.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I've loved this interview. I think our listeners will love it, and sure encourage people to keep finding their way to stay in medicine, keep finding a way to make a difference. And Dr. Rich Paris has done that. Thank you so much for your example.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Enjoyed getting to visit with you again. It's
Oh
been a while. You
yeah,
got to come up and visit us the next time you're in the area.
I will do that. That would be so fun. It's great to
That'd
talk
be
to you.
great.